my name is Alan Matthews. I'm a director of Earth Capital, which is a business focusing on providing advisory advice to impact-driven companies in the private markets, assisting with fundraising and with mergers and acquisition transaction activity. Delighted to welcome you to this edition of Sustainable Conversations, which continues our theme of matching net profit with net zero. We've decided to subtitle that from Boardroom to Bottom Line. And I'm delighted today to welcome Paul McNeillis from the consulting firm DSS Plus. And to get straight into things, I'd like to hand to Paul to explain about himself and DSS Plus.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. Delighted to be here. So, as I say, I'm Paul McNeillis. I'm the UK director for DSS Plus, responsible for all service lines in the UK market, also working with two fellow directors on all of our sustainability services across Europe. So, just a word about DSS Plus. We're an operations management consultancy. And what we're about is helping our clients achieve breakthrough results by transformation from the inside. And we do that. Our heritage is doing that in operational risk management, so particularly health and safety, but also in operational excellence and sustainability. And we're increasingly seeing that many of those factors are linked together when we consider change, which is a little bit our approach to considering net zero.
Very good. And then DSS Plus's consulting activity, Paul, what do you see as the key drivers to get clients to move from high-level net zero goals to embedding sustainability in day-to-day operations so that this becomes an embedded activity?
I think, as I say, I think back to our heritage. So we were originally carved out of DuPont. We approached operational risk management, safety, and we still do operational risk management and health and safety, I should say, as a change process. So when you realize it's a change process, you start to see that it's not just about having management systems. It's not just about having a plan or a strategy. And it's not just about having some technology. And you start to see the parallels with sustainability and net zero. Although those things are important, it's going to take more to achieve net zero beyond the quick wins. So the kinds of things that we found to be really important are effective leadership, what we sometimes refer to as visible felt leadership, clear governance, on the ground skills and competence at a whole series of different levels to actually get your program implemented. Mastery of data that I think we'll talk about a little bit more later on, and decision making, and really just integrating the whole of this goal and this strategy into your operating model and into your culture and way of working. That's our view, and what we've proven to be the case as very effective in operational risk management. And we are starting to see the same pattern in achieving net zero. So that's our perspective, and that's what we bring to the table.
Yes, indeed. So cultural change is incredibly important. And in our business, we continually come across companies with new technologies. And often some of the biggest constraints are getting the various established supply chains or various established modus operandi to accept new technology. So if we think about the fact that we have technology around, but the implementation often lags, from your vantage point, what are the real blockers to that?
Yeah, I think you can consider it as blockers. I guess once you start to have the model, the mental model, the belief, and the approach to change that I described earlier, you start to see more gaps than models. So a typical gap could be that a department has its own KPIs, but these haven't really been integrated with the KPIs necessary to reach net zero. It could be on the competence front that certain skills are required to actually implement this technological change, either on the organizational side or its supply chain side or its client side, and that those skills are actually the gap. Or it could be just that the plan is not structured and governed in the same way as the organization is. And we hear this, very often. We've held events and roundtables where people say things like, we're just sitting down for the first time with the procurement function or with this particular, the operations function, and starting to understand what their KPIs are and compare them to the KPIs we need to achieve our goals. So I think when you look at it like that, you have to ask, why would we think this would succeed if it wasn't fully designed as a change program? And so it's those gaps that we see more than the blockers, more than active opposition, which I think blockers sometimes suggests.
Okay, and so you'll typically be working with major clients in the processes you're describing. Again, from your perspective, and maybe from some of your clients' perspectives, how important is the role of startups and SMEs in the whole process to net zero? And how important do you think patient capital is in order to scale climate solutions? Is that going in the right direction, and is it done well?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's no doubt that SMEs and startups are a tremendous source of innovation, but as you say, there's a need to scale, and typically to become a supplier or an agent of transformation towards achieving net zero, there needs to be the scalability. So I think in terms of the investment landscape, as you know very well, investors in those SMEs and startups typically are investing for impact as well as results. So they tend to be, let's say, rather patient for financial returns. On the other hand, how patient are they in terms of impact? How patient should they be even? I mean, one might argue they should be quite impatient, saying, let's get to the impact quicker because we're purpose driven. And so what's the right pathway? I mean, one of the examples that I've seen that gave me a lot of confidence in one particular startup was this idea that they were a learning organization, and not just the idea, the actual demonstration. So recently attended a briefing to investors from the chief executive and his top team of a small company. And they spent probably the first half of that saying, this is what we got wrong. This is where we fell down. This is what we didn't understand about the marketplace. And here's how we're going to change and adapt and be more successful and have a new plan. And I think that's not something you see often in larger companies. It might not give you confidence if a larger company was to suddenly change direction. But I think thinking about innovators, the fact that their path is likely non-linear and that they are learning and adapting, that gives a lot of confidence. And I think that's something that investors also want to see, is this agility on the path to scaling up.
Okay, so similarly to technology, there is a raft of data that is becoming increasingly important in everything that happens in this world, and that's driven partly by much enhanced reporting requirements, but also a much greater attention to monitoring and seeing how companies and organisations can improve their performance. So, given that there is data everywhere, how do we turn that into actionable insights? And is that a challenge you face? And how do you encourage your own clients to overcome that?
Yeah, I think as you say, there's more and more data, and that's driven by disclosure and regulatory requirements, and that's not a bad thing if the data is connected to decision making. Of course, first of all, it has to be reliable, which is where third-party assurance and techniques like that come in. But I think for it to have value, and perhaps one of the biggest challenges for organizations is once they have this fairly high quality data and an abundance of it, how do they link it to decision making? And if I take an example with supply chain, what we've seen in the first generation of a lot of this data generated is that if it's compliance only, it's not very useful for decision making, or at least it's useful for quite simplistic decision making. So, for example, supplier pre-qualification. Do you comply with our code of conduct? Yes or no, and then in you come if it's a yes. What you need to do with this type of data is unpack it to become more amenable to decision making and combine it, back to the point about integration, with the classic commercial information which is currently being used for decision making. So how do I make decisions on selection of a supplier? How do I decide on my design of my products? Am I using this kind of information for eco design? All of those kinds of factors are give the ESG data and sustainability data more relevance and more added value. So that's been good to see. Another example is in supply chain finance. where supply chain finance has been there as a facility for suppliers of large organizations for quite some time. Now, a lot of companies are introducing ESG performance data, linking access to that finance. So again, it's making the data relevant so that you can then provide incentives and make decisions for your business. That's the key with data. I think, once you've passed the threshold of having a certain amount of data, make it relevant, make it have impact in your business.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of backlash potentially going on at the moment, maybe starting in the US, to do with the whole raft of reporting that's come into the sustainability space. And I think there's a very clear view that whilst the reporting needs to be appropriate, in fact, what the main focus needs to be going forward is the implementation and delivery of steps towards addressing climate change and zero carbon. And from what you've just said, it sounds like there are various manoeuvres going on, which is good to hear. Of course, we all talk about the decisive decade, which you take that as being the 2020s. We're 2025 and halfway through. And I should quickly say that one of our future Sustainable Conversation episodes is going to be addressing what does the world's half-term report look like in 2025. But from your perspective, if we just think about the next 12 months, what single shift would you point to as needing to happen or happening in terms of giving the greatest impact on net zero progress?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, a very good question. Obviously, for each individual organization, so when we're advising our clients, we conduct a third-party assessment of where they are on their roadmap to net zero. So, I mean, typically a lot of organizations now are committed. They have a plan, they have a date. Typically also they may have made some progress and taken some low-hanging fruit. Which of those levers that I mentioned earlier, whether it's leadership or governance or data or skills, needs to be triggered in order to accelerate their progress to net zero, tends to be on a case-by-case basis. But I think if I come back to our sort of theory of change, and theory of change applied to net zero being itself a requirement to initiate a change process within an organization, I think if we can get that idea into the heads of leaders, the heads of leadership across organizations, and also with investors, they'll start to see that they need to conduct these assessments and approach this as a change process. And I think that would help the shift towards net zero. I think the idea that it's just a little bit of finance, a little bit of technology, so a typical kind of marginal abatement cost curve type of situation, if you're stuck there, that's probably why your net zero program is stuck. So we need to look at this more holistically as a change process. And that's really, I think, the key thing I'd like to leave listeners with is think about net zero as implementation of a change process, and then you're off to a more solid start.
Well, that's a very clear message. Very good. I think perhaps as we get towards the end of our conversation today, it would be great if you could maybe give some examples and highlight some of the projects you've been working on.
Yeah, so of course, as I said, our heritage is delivering change and impact in operational risk management, and we've got literally hundreds of cases in that regard. I think the practice of implementing change programs for net zero is rather new. That said, we have some leading adopters, and we've implemented some great cases. For example, in a manufacturing organization working in manufacturing and particularly packaging and the technology around that. Our client was facing, let's say, the limits to implementing their net zero program. They saw that they were potentially heading off track. They started to move into more complex territory, such as their ambitions in scope 3 emissions, for example, and they didn't really know where to go. So we were working with them on another scope where typically we would take the temperature and do an assessment across functions. So we said, why don't we also look into the attitudes, the readiness, the competence, the governance, all of these systemic factors to gauge your state of readiness to implement net zero. So we did that. And what they found quite surprised them, because they were expecting to see, given that they had a clear strategy and clear commitments, that everybody was ready And the truth is they weren't in a state of readiness. So what we then started to do was work on the specific issues. Is it a governance issue here? Do we need to do some competence building there? And then as a result, this accelerated the next phase of delivery of their net zero program. So that's one of our early assignments. We're working on several more now. And yeah, I think our clients are seeing great results. I mean, it's, as I said at the beginning, it's what we're about, is achieving breakthrough results. So we're not typically called in to do something, let's say, that is rather straightforward that anyone else could do. It's the fact that we understand operations and implementation that enables us to go deeper and help our clients really achieve those breakthrough results. So yeah, and we're very excited about doing more and more of this work as it becomes more relevant.
Paul, thank you very much. That concludes our sustainable conversation today. Delighted to have you participate, and very good to follow up from the panel we were both on at Innovation Zero in Olympia a few weeks ago. We look forward to very much keeping in touch with you and all of us working on developing the things we've talked about today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alan. A pleasure, as always. Thank you.